David actually, after he graduated with his baccalaureate degree, went into the Peace Corps. And he was in the Dominican Republic. He was there to help found and develop school services for students with developmental disabilities. He had this sense that he really wanted to make a difference in the world. David had taken a master's degree at Mankato State University in rehab counseling and was finishing his PhD in ed policy and administration.
I transferred to St. Cloud State from UMD. I knew I wanted to be a special ed teacher, and David Johnson was the first professor at St. Cloud State that I met. He had this sense of making me believe that I was capable and that I could set my sights higher than I maybe had set them for myself.
He was an assistant professor. He enjoyed teaching. He enjoyed students. He had a great job. He was on his way to tenure. And I offered him a half-time position with the prospect that we would hustle like crazy and seek grants and contracts and make it a full-time position. And I said, at the end of 6 months, if we don't come up with some money, you might not have a job. He took a chance on us, and did we benefit from his commitment?
I first met David in the early 80s. I thought of him as older than me, even though he wasn't, because he seemed so mature and so knowledgeable all the time.
While he was director for 20 years, he did lots of other things as well.
Faculty and all of the duties there as a full professor, and administrative roles within that in terms of coordinating the program, et cetera, director of ICI, and associate dean for research. That's a skillful bit of juggling.
David is the kind of academic that always worried me, because as a junior faculty member and I see these academic scholars do all these multiple roles, I always wondered, wow, I don't know how he does it. I don't think I'll ever get there.
David was associate dean for research when I was the dean of the College of Education and Human Development, and I think I can say very easily that I couldn't have done it without David. He's brilliant. He's a great administrator. He's a good thinker. He was very patient. He was very forward-thinking.
Has his fingerprints over some very exciting entrepreneurial activities that took place in the college.
He really was behind taking a known intervention for dropout prevention and took it to another level where it was self-sustaining and you didn't have to have grant funding to keep it moving forward.
He not only did his work, taught his students, advised his students, large numbers I might add, but he also made this commitment to the university writ large.
There were times when he would tell me what he was doing and all the different things he was in, and I would say to him, David, I'm exhausted listening.
I would call David one of the nation's leading experts in transition of youth and young adults from high school into employment, high school into post-secondary education, and high school into community life.
David's work in transition made big differences in how transition was viewed by policymakers and how it was viewed as important.
I think from a professional standpoint, David had a massive impact on workforce development for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I mean, he really did.
He was happiest when he was writing grants, landing grants, getting a grant awarded was a huge, huge thing for him.
I remember staying there from 8 a.m. to midnight, resulting in my car having a squirrel build a nest in the car. I hardly made it home. David was out there trying to help me get the car going. He was always so kind.
He worked so hard and put in so many hours, but it excited him. And, and he'd look at it as something that needed to happen. He'd say, well, I'm going to look for a grant for that. And, 6 months later, I'd look and he'd go, oh, yeah, I got that grant and it's for $3 million. And then I passed that on to these other people, or I created a team.
It was with David's help and Mary McAvoy's help working together to bring the National Center on Educational Outcomes into ICI, where I think it really blossomed.
When I became dean, I was able to reach out to David and have a few conversations with him. And I really appreciated his sage advice and just sort of calm demeanor and institutional wisdom.
He was always positioned as a critical friend, where if things were going well, he would tell you. And if things needed to change or there were concerns, he would tell you that too.
I really appreciated that I worked with him for a number of years before pursuing a PhD where he was my advisor. As an advisor, he understood that I am a full-time employee, full-time student. I'm a mom, and understanding how to kind of guide me to fit my PhD work in with all of those things that I have going on.
Students would come to him with, stress, worries, trying to figure out, how do I do this dissertation? How do I make this thing work? And he would sit them down and he would say, okay, well, let's figure this thing out. Let's figure out a plan to do this in a very practical way that's not going to break your back, that's not going to make you stay here for the next 8 years.
He had probably more advisees than most of the faculty in OLPD.
In addition to him being able to do everything, he also knew what he couldn't do. It wasn't until when I was sending the final draft 2 weeks and 2 days before my defense that he shared with me that he had to step down from being my advisor because he was going into hospice.
He mentored and advised so many students. I think we counted 350. He was a professor. He was well respected in his field. He did so much for this university. But ultimately what shows up is him as a human being and always treating everyone else with that same sense of care.
One of the things I saw in David was the same thing that I saw in many of the early founders of ICI. And that was this sort of entrepreneurial spirit, this value-based commitment to really make a difference in the world.
David was so good at communicating what the issues were.
Dave's ability to summarize a situation, to be able to, in a succinct, few words, be able to pinpoint what the issue is and what we're going to do about it, was second to none.
One of the things that I thought was most noteworthy about David was his steadiness. He was solid in his belief on what I think the ICI Center was about. Others that worked with David always saw him as a person you could count on, as a person who was going to contribute.
David's ability to help me see the world in a bigger way than maybe I had thought about seeing it was transformational to me. And I worked with him for a number of years.
He was focused and he knew what the priority was.
He was creative in how he thought about ICI and where our money would come from.
This is a guy that you learn the passion of which he hates to leave money on the table. Right? And so just that orientation of how do we get ourselves positioned strategically to not leave the money on the table, because that resource gives us the ability to do more.
He knew that we really shouldn't be fully federally funded. That wasn't a good idea. So early on, David was pretty open to working with states and taking on contracts that might look very different than a grant.
Dave is able to show, when we think about the mission of the College in Human Development, that this value proposition of the research unit like ICI is both financially a good bet and mission a good bet.
He was part of really great networks. And if he didn't have the answer or know the solution, he knew who to bring to the table to figure it out.
What I loved about him is that it was never about David. It was always about the work. I just think that that's so rare.
There's a lot of drama that occurs in higher education. A lot of egos. A lot of people want to have their stories told, and that is the way it should be. David was never that person. He would never overreact.
Like a lot of people who are so driven, it's easy to let the work take over itself. But what he never forgot was there's a human attached to the work.
He really lived by, we shouldn't be doing research just to do research. We should be doing research to change people's lives.
He also valued connections. So connections to the people who worked here. That meant mentoring them and making sure he was there
If you know David, he could do it all. I mean, he could do everything. I mean, he could just, does he need a co-PI? I'm not sure. Yet he also gave me opportunities and asked me to do things so that I could learn the process. It wasn't so much of like delegating, but it was more like showing that he had the confidence in me.
What he saw as talent, he developed it, and I was grateful that he saw it in me.
He also had this deep commitment to making a contribution that extended beyond himself. And it's the notion of paying it forward to the future.
Our daughter was actually in special education. Steph graduated successfully in the transition program in Minneapolis. Later in her career, she applied for a job at ICI. She knew David Johnson. They developed a very lovely relationship.
She would refer to David as the big kahuna. She would say, well, when the big kahuna comes back from D.C., we're going to see if this happens or that happens.
You could always tell how proud David was of this place and the people that worked here. And he was always willing to give credit where credit was due. I always appreciated that. Not everybody does that.
David had a good team surrounding him, everybody from administrative support to financial support to HR support.
He had no desire to micromanage. He had a desire to know you and to make sure that you were on a career path that would take you to the next level. If I had to say one word that described just his presence, I would say stoic.
The word I would use to describe him is unflappable. He carried a lot of weight for a lot of people.
David was very humble and unassuming, but somehow I think that may have been a trick. As soon as you heard him speak, you knew that he had done his homework.
He took his work seriously. He took his commitment seriously. He took his commitment to his family seriously, his office seriously, his colleagues seriously. He wanted to make a difference in the world, but he was also a lighthearted person who could see humor around him and share it with others.
He is probably one of the funniest people I have ever worked with. And what makes him funny is the juxtaposition of what you think he is and who he really is.
Man, he had such a great sense of humor, and it was dry. It was a very dry sense of humor.
And you had to be kind of smart to get it.
He would be the funniest when he wasn't cracking a smile. And you'd go, is he joking or is he serious?
And, you know, he graduated from high school with Jesse Ventura.
When his office was down in the lower level, the garden level of Patty Hall, and he had a particularly large mountain of paperwork on his desk one afternoon. And I commented on it that, you know, wow, it's going to take him a while to wade through all of those papers or something like that. And he said, just wait till you see it tomorrow. And I showed up for a meeting the next morning and his desk was completely clean. And I said, did you stay up all night, David, cleaning your desk? And he said, no, I just picked up one end of it and let everything slide off the other end into the garbage and it's gone. If I didn't need it, you know, for the last 2 weeks, I don't need it now. I still don't know if he was serious about that or what he did with all those papers.
We had a lot of good conversations outside of work or non-work topics like fishing, camping, outdoors. He often shared stories of fishing with Bob up in Canada.
We fished together for over 15 years. We opened the Canadian fishing season for at least 15 years, I think pretty close to 20. We had pictures taken of catching some pretty big fish. I got home, back to my office, and I get this picture from David with him proudly holding this giant fish. It was a big walleye, I believe. And me next to him holding a fish that was about 6 inches long. He had one of the colleagues in ICI shrink my fish, so it looked like a small minnow compared to his. So that's kind of his sense of humor. Another part of the story, you might say, well, how did David become David, you know?
I grew up with a brother with a significant developmental disability. He lived in the family home with us. He taught me many things.
When he would talk about his family and about his brother in particular, you really saw the love and the emotion and the passion that he brought to his work when he talked about his brother. It was really clear to me that what was most important to David was his family, without question.
We both had 2 sons. It was David who advised me to immediately go out and get AAA for both of my sons when they became drivers because you would need it, and I did. And I went over he said there'll be a maximum number of times you can use it, and he was right, and we went over it. And then, of course, his love for his wife, for Sharon, and the horses and the dogs and the farm, and he loved talking about that.
If you had animals, I think you could always strike up a conversation. Yeah, I think he'd much rather talk about animals than work.
We both agreed that the most fun thing in life was to become a grandparent. I know that was just a great source of pride for him, and he would just break into this great smile whenever he would tell a story about his grandchildren.
It's that personal side of him that he was so quiet and reserved about, but when he would open up about it, you could really connect to his heart.
This is a person that kept his eye on the ball, did hard work, achieved, I think, monumental things. But his values were such that he took care of all the other people around him as well.
Even when he first called me and I said to him, he was basically, telling me that it's terminal, and I was trying to have a conversation with him, trying to make it about him. And he's like, Eileen, I have full, you've got this. I have full confidence. And he kept turning it back to my defense and and wanted to just talk about and didn't want me to have to worry about not being able to go through with that.
He was just a steady force that who influenced people, and sometimes I don't think he even knew he did, and even if he did, he wouldn't mention it. And that's a great model for all leaders, I think.
I'm really sad that he won't be here to be with me as I finish my PhD journey.
I know I'm a better engaged scholar and a better academic leader because of David.
I join in remembering him, in celebrating him, and how lucky we were to have known David.
He was a good guy. I'm going to miss him terribly.
He will really be missed. He is missed already.
I do miss him a lot. So it's one of those things you think about and you say to yourself, man, those are relationships that don't come along very often.
I don't know how my life led me to a place where I got to do work with a David Johnson, but it has allowed me to have a career I never expected and to have a relationship with amazing people. His incredible wife, Sharon. I feel like all the people who didn't get that opportunity, I feel badly for them, and I feel just so blessed.
It's been a wonderful career for me. I could ask for nothing more. Work where you can choose the type of work you really want to do, as well as being able to work with very incredible people who share that same passion with you.